All 38 tribes of Oklahoma speak out against Governor Kevin Stitt's propaganda against Oklahoma's 38 tribal nations. He is pushing for policy to erode tribal sovereignty. And he wants to oppress the growing tribal economies with all the tribes, especially against the 5 tribes such as the Cherokee, Creek, Choctaw, Seminole, and Chickasaw. Mr. Stitt, tribal leaders will stand up to all your colonizer policies and refute your anti-indigenous propaganda.
In 2019, Oklahoma's tribal nations had an economic impact of over $15.5 billion in a state through their business revenues and government expenditures.
It's a battle that's been waging for months now. The governor wants Oklahoma's tribes to pay more of their casino earnings back to the state.
But tonight, tribal leaders are responding with a lawsuit, now suing Governor Stitt as games like roulette, craps, and blackjack hang in limbo. Here's Brent Skarkey with the latest.
This whole ordeal started back in July when Kevin Stitt sent out a letter from the office in that building back there, the state capitol, the governor's office, saying that he wanted to renegotiate the percentage that casinos pay back to the state. It's now become a legal battle about a 15-year compact that the governor says expires tonight. The tribes say differently.
Are you worried that these casinos are going to be closed at midnight?
No, I'm not worried about that because the language clearly reads if there isn't a new agreement, the contract will automatically renew, and it says it in real big words, black and white.
So the Cherokee, Choctaw, and Chickasaw tribes filing a federal lawsuit today against Governor Stitt. They're asking a judge to decide whether the compact automatically renews if a new deal is not worked out. Chickasaw Nation Governor Bill Anatubby saying in part, while we prefer negotiation to litigation, the federal court is now the only reasonable alternative to bring legal certainty to this issue. But in regards to the lawsuit, the governor saying in part, I am disappointed that a number of Oklahoma tribes, led by the Chickasaw, Cherokee, and Choctaw nations, did not accept the state's offer on October 28th for a 3-person arbitration panel to resolve our dispute outside of court. This was a capstone action to their numerous refusals to meet with state and begin negotiations on the model gaming compact to ensure a win-win for all parties at the end of this year. But some tribal leaders disagree. They say they were not approached by Stitt in good faith.
I haven't seen him in any of our meetings that we've had, and it would have been good if he would have walked through the door and said, this is what I want to do, what can you do? When you're treated as a third-class citizen, you're disrespected, you're almost dehumanized, what is the tribe supposed to do?
The governor says in his statement that he has the best interest of all 4 million Oklahomans to look after. The tribes say they expect gaming to go on as scheduled.
Hey guys, yeah, you well know that tensions between the tribes and the state have really been high ever since 2019 when Governor Kevin Stitt attempted to renegotiate gaming compacts between the state and a number of tribes. And as we get into 2022, tensions continue to be high.
I think that Governor Stitt is so bent on creating this narrative that tribes just don't have a place in the state of Oklahoma.
Cherokee Nation Principal Chief Chuck Hoskin Jr. making those comments at a meeting with other tribal leaders Friday. They come after negotiations broke down over hunting and fishing agreements.
Fellow Muskogee Creek citizens and friends, and I made it clear to Governor Stitt that I will continue to prioritize the needs and interests of Muskogee Creek Nation during this process.
Tomorrow, we may know whether the Supreme Court will take a second look at the McGirt decision. Since that ruling came down 2 summers ago, in which the court ruled the eastern half of Oklahoma could still be a reservation, I have been speaking about its destructive consequences for our state.
Again, I mean, everything I said is true. I'm only going to speak the facts. Oklahomans can see it. Again, they're going to try to attack me and say that I don't like them. That's nothing to be further from the truth. The tribes don't want to sign that, in my opinion, or they would have already done it, and they're pushing for this compact that basically takes the definition of Indian country, and after the McGirt decision, it has different consequences. It potentially could mean 42% of our state. That's why they want that compact signed. So I'm encouraging the legislature to not override that veto, and if it's really about a 1-year extension and a 50-50 term, they should sign the one that we've offered the tribes.
In February, the House and Senate voted to extend those compacts, but Governor Kevin Stitt vetoed that legislation, saying he believes the state can get a better deal. In June, the Senate failed by 1 vote to override Stitt's veto, but on Monday, the Senate voted 34-7, overriding it. Broken Arrow Republican Nathan Dahm says he believes it's the job of the governor to negotiate with the tribes.
I'm rising in opposition because of the process whereby the legislature is trying to extend the compacts, a process that I believe is illegal, not just statutorily, but also constitutionally.
But Senate Pro Tem Greg Treat says that Senate is allowed to make decisions that differ from the governor's.
If this body finds that the governor is not negotiating in good faith, I reserve the right as the leader of this body, and you all shall reserve the right to change that law if we so desire and have the support to do so next year.
Governor Kevin Stitt responded to the vote, saying in part, despite real concerns for the future of our state, the Senate has chosen to disregard the governor's compact in favor of compact language the tribes wanted. He went on to say, I'm trying to protect eastern Oklahoma from turning into a reservation, and I've been working to ensure these compacts are the best deal for all 4 million Oklahomans. Meanwhile, the tribes say they are happy with Monday's outcome. In a statement, Choctaw Nation Chief Gary Batten says these important agreements provide massive benefits for tribes and all Oklahomans, and we thank the legislator for doing what is right. Cherokee Principal Chief Chuck Hoskin Jr. also responded to the Senate's decision by saying in part, today is a great step forward in preserving carefully negotiated compact agreements that have served both Oklahoma and Cherokee Nation well for decades.
I just don't believe in saying that this group doesn't have to play by the same set of rules as everybody else. So again, very, very simple, has nothing against sovereignty, that we've all been working together for, since 1907. Let's keep working together, but let's not have one set of rules that favors one group over another.
He is the governor that's done the most damage to state-tribal relations, I think, of any governor in the history of this state.
Also tonight, continued relationship strains between the state and the tribes. The governor saying today he'll fight to keep eastern Oklahoma reservation-free, he says.
He also attacked another state's tribal land. News 4's Capitol Bureau Chief Kaylee Olivas is live tonight. And Kaylee, you said you'd done some fact-checking.
Yeah, Kevin, Joel, that's right. We spent the afternoon fact-checking some of those claims that the governor made earlier this afternoon in his State of the State address. Governor Kevin Stitt says Oklahoma can't operate as a state with 2 different sets of rules, especially when it's based on race. He says as a state, we're headed down a road that's very comparable to the Navajo Nation in Arizona. But that tribe tells me all those claims he made aren't true.
His continued conflict with tribal leaders is unacceptable.
Are we willing to risk everything to do the right thing? Or will we risk the dream of Oklahoma's future for personal gain?
The governor using his State of the State address to double down against the tribes. Confusion, difficult, and divisive. Words Governor Kevin Stitt used to describe the aftermath of the U.S. Supreme Court ruling in favor of McGirt in 2020, which prohibits criminal cases involving tribal members on reservation land from being tried in state court.
We are still operating under a confusing and conflicting patchwork of jurisdiction across our state.
He fundamentally doesn't see a role for tribal governments, but I have news for him. It's the 21st century. We're here. We're not going anywhere. We're going to be here as partners.
The governor referencing 2 state cases to make his point, one still making its way through the court system, Hooper and Strobel. Hooper dismissed, affirming Muskogee Nation as reservation land. Strobel looking to exempt tribal members who live and work on reservation land from state taxes. Cases like these, the governor says, are taking the state down the wrong path.
Arizona has the Navajo reservation. And it is true, tribal members who live on the Navajo reservation do not pay taxes to the state of Arizona.
With that, he claims Arizona doesn't fund public schools, build roads, nor sends Arizona Highway Patrol to enforce laws on Indian land. However, the Navajo Nation says all 3 of his claims are false.
And I think if we show them the respect they have earned through being elected by their own tribal nations, we can go a long way in making deals.
I think the tribes have demonstrated in the past that they want things to be great in Oklahoma too, and we'll find ways to work those out.
Well, News 4 has heard from several other tribes today, including the Chickasaw and Choctaw Nations.
Dear Governor, Native American tribes are not based on race. They are based on lineage, heritage, and citizenship. The tribal nations have every right to exist in Oklahoma. Kevin Stitt is just a typical colonizer, dreaming of erasing all Native American tribal nations in Oklahoma because he believes that tribes are in the way of American exceptionalism.
Did Kevin Stitt really use the race argument against the tribes of Oklahoma? He shouldn't go there, especially after the federal government created policy that catered to white American society for 245 years now. Governor Stitt is using a typical neo-conservative argument that uses race as a means to undermine tribal sovereignty. Like what was mentioned before, tribes are not based on race. What's wrong with race-based civil rights protection anyway? We know that race policy is forbidden in the U.S. Constitution. However, there needs to be race-based civil rights laws for each minority group in the United States to create equal opportunity and give justice. But anyway, as we repeat, tribal nations are not based on race, they are based on lineage and heritage that provides the criteria for tribal nation citizenship. Moreover, Native American tribal existence is protected by the treaties made between the federal government and each Native American tribal nation. The neoconservative race-based argument just doesn't work against tribal nations.
The tribes of Oklahoma have every right to exist as tribal nations. Native American tribes have been in Oklahoma for well over 12,000 years, which is well before the state of Oklahoma even existed. It doesn't matter if these tribes originated on the land of Oklahoma or were forced here on the Trail of Tears. The 1866 treaty protects what's left of tribal sovereignty in Oklahoma. After all, the state of Oklahoma only exists because both the federal government and settlers conspired to take tribal land in the territory of Oklahoma using the 1887 Allotment Act.
In eastern Oklahoma, which is on the boundaries of the 5 tribes, on certain areas of tribal lands that became white and or black majority, the state of Oklahoma assumed jurisdiction of these areas, which forced the 5 tribes and all tribes of Oklahoma to make compact agreements to share jurisdiction, economic affairs, and regulation. Which is why nearly half of the reservation boundaries of the 5 tribes is majority occupied by white Americans and others. Keep in mind that most tribes of Oklahoma lost their original reservation boundaries entirely due to several allotment acts that took their original reservation boundaries away. These borderless tribes have only some small plots of tribal trust land for them to live on and govern themselves, but don't have official reservation boundaries of their own. Kevin Stitt doesn't seem to understand any of this. But it's so obvious, he tries to misinterpret the treaties and compact agreements in an attempt to undermine tribal sovereignty by claiming the state has the right to control everything. The Dawes Allotment Act of 1887 authorized the federal government to break up tribal lands across the United States and territories by partitioning them into individual plots, which paved the way for settlers to horn their way into tribal allotments, which was a big factor in Oklahoma. The act is why eastern Oklahoma today is divided by tribal trust land, individual tribal citizen allotments, and private allotments occupied by white Americans and non-native corporations.
Tribal sovereignty is not adverse to state sovereignty. Tribal sovereignty is an enhancement of the opportunities for Oklahomans. I think it's wrong thinking to assume because there are a lot of governments that there is going to be chaos. There are 77 counties in the state of Oklahoma. Why is there not chaos here? The fundamental respect of authority and the rule of law and jurisdictional boundaries and a willingness to get along.
Tribal sovereigns are just like any other sovereign. They want what's best for their kids, they want what's best for their communities.
It's tribal sovereignty that provides the opportunities for the roads and bridges to be built. It's the building of the hospitals, and clinics. It's the economic development opportunities in small towns that are supported by tribes. That's not a threat to Oklahoma, that's a benefit to Oklahoma.
Oklahoma thrives together.
OCO, it is with great pride that I stand before you representing the Cherokee Nation and alongside these leaders of these sovereign Indian nations. We stand united on a great many things, but I do want to be clear. We stand united on the proposition that the Gaming Compact automatically renews. It is the law. It is the compact. It is a compact born of the support of an overwhelming majority of the citizens of the state of Oklahoma. November 2nd, 2004, 60% of the voters approved it. The compact has been win-win. It's benefited both the tribes and the state. It has produced more than $1.5 billion in exclusivity fees to the state of Oklahoma since 2006. The compact works, it is not broke, and it will continue to work for many years to come, and it will continue January 1st, 2020. As we've said from day one, we stand united in accepting a realistic and reasonable proposal from Governor Stitt. We stand ready. Absent a proposal over these past 4 months, tribal leaders are discussing ideas about the future, ideas about receiving a proposal for the first time from the governor of the state of Oklahoma, and we will be prepared to talk about ideas such as exclusivity fees and rates. But I want to be clear about this. It'll be a discussion that delivers value for value to the tribes and the state, and it will continue to be win-win. Our discussions reflect our unified desire to be positive and to work for the greater good of our nations and our state. Would
Yes, since 1907, we've all understood. I mean, we grew up in Oklahoma history in Oklahoma that the great thing about Oklahoma is we didn't have reservations. We all worked together. We allotted out land 160 acres at a time at statehood. And that land has been bought and sold, and Tulsa springs up, and we all go to the same schools. We don't have a separate reservation or land held in reserve just by the tribes like they do in New Mexico or the Navajo reservation. And thank goodness, the poverty in some of those areas compared to Oklahoma, it's night and day. The education system is night and day compared to where we're at, compared to what a true reservation is in South Dakota.
They're in a terrible budget crisis. Instead of adding to education, you know, we gave $5 million to Oklahoma Public Schools last year. The state is cutting education. Instead of putting money into higher education, Cherokee Nation put over $14 million into higher education in the form of scholarships for our people. The state's cutting higher education. That strategy that the state has, it's not really a strategy, it's a catastrophe.
The Indian tribes in this state are the best friends that the state of Oklahoma has ever had, and you can measure that in so many ways.
I'm Madison Cleaver with The Oklahoman. Tribal leaders and community members gathered at the First Americans Museum in Oklahoma City to reveal the economic contributions Native tribes have made to the state.
In 2019, Oklahoma's tribal nations had an economic impact of over $15.5 billion in a state through their business revenues and government expenditures.
The study found that tribes across Oklahoma support over 113,000 jobs. Those employed are not just tribal citizens, but non-tribal citizens across Oklahoma.
This report tells us that tribes are not only financially strong, but rank as one of the top employers of the state.
Tribes don't have to create infrastructure, they choose to. Tribes don't have to create new businesses, attract new businesses, and employ so many Oklahomans. They choose to.
There are 38 federally recognized tribes in Oklahoma, and these nations save the state millions of dollars by operating their own healthcare facilities to provide care to Native and non-Native patients. The tribes also contribute millions to their communities to support education and community initiatives.
Look at the figures and statistics and dollar amounts in this tribal economic report from Oklahoma tribes. You may be surprised and reminded just how important tribes are to the well-being of Oklahoma.
This report analyzed the year of 2019 and studied the most recent audited data available for all tribes.
Well, we're making progress in this country. I mean, just within the last month, we've seen the Violence Against Women Act reauthorized, including key tribal provisions. We obviously saw the McGirt case, and we saw the response of tribes to act in a very responsible way to protect people. I think the United States is starting to understand that tribal governments are perfectly capable of not only governing their own affairs, but undertaking really important efforts like providing criminal jurisdiction, providing protection to victims, making sure justice is served. It's only some regressive leaders, a handful of regressive leaders in this country that don't get it. One of them happens to be the governor of the state of Oklahoma. The rest of us, though, are understanding that tribes have a vital role in protecting people. We're doing that every day.
So again, I don't know why they're saying that. McGirt started as a defense attorney case that ran up to the Supreme Court. That said that they were never disestablished. But to your point, the court also said on Castro that yes, the state still has jurisdiction. Indian land may be located in the state, but the state law still preempts everything. Okay, so that's what the Castro case said, and that's very important. It was a huge win at the U.S. Supreme Court when the court basically reversed a little bit of the McGirt decision and said state law is still dominant, even though you might have Indian tribes within your state. So go back and read the Castro case as well.
The governor of the state of Oklahoma doesn't seem to understand that cooperation is better than conflict. So once again, we're here defending tribal sovereignty. Well, tribal relations with the state, insofar as the governor's office is concerned, is at an all-time low. Governor Kevin Stitt is the most anti-Indian governor in the history of the state of Oklahoma. But there's so many other leaders in the state of Oklahoma that want to work cooperatively with us. We have a great relationship with the state legislature on a bipartisan basis. We work with state agencies all the time. We've been working for years to help build up the state of Oklahoma, and most leaders understand and respect that. So I think we can all, get beyond Governor Stitt's really 19th century mentality that tribes are somehow a nuisance, that any gain by tribes is somehow a loss for the state. I think he's the only one that thinks that way. So we're going to continue to do our work. I think there's ways to build on the great relationships we have with other state leaders. Just be nice if the governor of the state of Oklahoma would join the rest of us here in the 21st century.
Thank you. Are you feeling confident ahead of the trial?
I am confident because the law's on our side. Look, the governor wants generations of legal precedent and statutes passed by Congress to be overturned. I don't think the court's going to do that. I think in this day and age, the United States is going to keep its promise to Indian tribes, no matter how many times the governor goes into court and begs it to break a promise.
It's now my pleasure to introduce the 22nd President of the National Congress of American Indians, Jefferson Keel, to deliver the State of Indian Nations address. President Keel was first elected as president of NCI from October 2019 to 2013. He was re-elected as NCI's president in October 2017. Jefferson Keel is serving his 5th term as Lieutenant Governor of the unconquerable Chickasaw Nation. President Keel is a living example of the honorable public service. He represents Indian country on numerous boards and committees and is a tireless and fearless warrior for tribal sovereignty. Please join me in welcoming our NCI President Jefferson Keel.
Thank you. Where NCAI launched its 75th anniversary, the year as a difference-making organization protecting tribal sovereignty and advancing tribal priorities. I stand here today to proudly proclaim to you, Congress, the administration, and the world, the state of Indian Nations is strong, and we grow stronger. We grow stronger every day. From our cultures and languages to our economies and political power, tribal nations are crafting a great resurgence that is forging brighter futures for our communities and generations yet to come. Despite facing strong headwinds and resistance, we are elevating our presence and voice in this country's public and policy discourse at a time when it's most needed. We're claiming our rightful place as the original pieces in the mosaic of America, and our rightful role as key contributors in the charting of its future course. The signs of our resurgence are everywhere. They're seen in sports and the arts, where increasingly we're sharing our stories and identities with mainstream society. From actor Wes Studi speaking his Cherokee language to the world at last year's Oscars, to Onondaga lacrosse star Lyle Thompson turning an ugly display of racism into a teachable moment about dignity, empathy, and cultural pride. They're seen in expressions of respect for Native people by those who mold America's youth. From the state of Florida, honoring Joy Prescott, a Seminole immersion school teacher, as Teacher of the Year, to Little League International's decision to ban race-based mascots from all sanctioned competition. Our resilience is seen in tribal nations' building of robust economies, which provide jobs and families, economic security to hundreds of thousands of Native people, and tens of thousands of non-Native people. Indian country has a long way to go, but in more and more places we are becoming the primary drivers of economic growth, fostering a better quality of life for all. Our unity is seen in our growing alliances, powerfully displayed in recent legal briefs defending the Indian Child Welfare Act. They saw 325 tribal nations, 57 Native organizations, 31 child welfare organizations, 21 states, several members of Congress, and other partners join forces to keep Native children immersed in their tribal families, cultures, languages, and communities. Our strength is heard. Our strength is heard in the enduring power of our songs, prayers of tolerance and humility, sung with a good mind and enlightening purpose in the face of ignorance and arrogance. It is seen in the midterm elections in North Dakota, New Mexico, Minnesota, and elsewhere. Native people, understanding the stakes, turned out to the polls like never before, despite determined efforts to keep us away. In many places, we were the margin of victory, showing we are a political force to be reckoned with. And our resurgence is seen in the record number of Native candidates who ran for federal, state, and local offices and won.